So we're very pleased to have with us today our guest, Mohamed Ag Ayoya, the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General in the Central African Republic and Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator in the UN mission, MINUSCA, in the Central African Republic, and he'll brief you on the humanitarian situation in that country. Mr. Ag Ayoya, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much indeed for having me here. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to brief you today. I had the chance to do this in my previous role as UNICEF representative in South Sudan a few years back. Since then, I moved and represented UNICEF in Somalia and then in Afghanistan. In my new capacity as Humanitarian Coordinator, but also Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General and the Resident Coordinator in CAR for the past 8 months, I can tell you how CAR is actually Africa's overlooked middle child, one that is squeezed, landlocked, and often forgotten inside a troubled region, becoming even more troubled with the new events that have happened over the past few weeks. But let me also tell you that its people are extremely resilient, and there is a lot of potential for the country to actually get out of the cycle of crisis that it has been through for many years. The work can help CAR move forward with humanitarian solidarity today, but also thinking long term, not only actually continue to patch the wounds as we have done over the past number of years that we have been supporting CAR. CAR has been into conflicts for 10 years or even more, and that have caused the displacement of 500,000 of Central Africans in the country, in a country of 6 million people. So you can easily understand that these IDPs are quite significant, and also caused more than 700,000 people to be refugees in neighboring countries. Nonetheless, CAR has been quite generous. CAR has opened its door to 18,000 asylum seekers and returnees from Sudan, following the crisis in Sudan, but also to 38,000 asylum seekers and returnees from Chad, also following conflicts that have happened there. As we speak today here in this room, we have our SRSG and the Prime Minister who are visiting Birawo, which is where actually we have the Sudanese refugees, and they are accompanied by 7 head of agencies, UN agencies, and donors actually supporting the response in that area. But let me also tell you that CAR is not just a humanitarian crisis, it's also actually a protection and a gender crisis. Unfortunately, the number of gender-based violence cases are extremely high. We have, just in the first 6 months of 2023, we have 11,000 cases of gender-based violence that were reported in CAR. So that number is actually probably higher than the 11,000 cases because, as you may know, those cases are not always well reported. Nonetheless, the response to gender-based violence in CAR is actually one of the most underfunded through our humanitarian response plan. It's only actually 11% funded in 2023. And that takes me to talk a little bit about the funding for our humanitarian response plan, which was exceptionally well funded over the past 2 years, reaching 94% in 2021 and 95% in 2022. And this is really the place for me to also be extremely grateful to our donors who have been so generous to support the people of CAR with such high amounts of funding and money over the past 2 years. However, what we are now facing with is that with the global increase in financial requirements and crisis around the world, we see a negative impact on our funding for CAR. And actually, again, as we speak today, the financing of our humanitarian response plan is only at 36%. And at the same time last year, it was 65%. So a huge drop actually in the funding we have received this year compared to the previous years. So if you allow me, I will maybe just have to share with you this afternoon 3 asks. The first one is really to make sure that we continue, all of us together, to keep the spotlights on the humanitarian crisis in the Central African Republic, because we do have 2.4 million men, women, boys, and girls whose well-being is at risk. Those are actually in need of humanitarian response. And we have just recently received the visit of the UN Coordinator for Famine Prevention and Response, Mrs. Rina Gilani, who came in to see exactly what is happening on the ground in terms, for example, of food insecurity, but also had the chance to visit a number of programs that are being supported by humanitarians. Second is to continue, all of us, to advocate for more funding for the humanitarian response plan for CAR, especially for the underfunded sectors. I spoke about the gender-based violence, but also there are needs in nutrition, there are needs in education, and there are needs in health and WASH. And then third, for me, is to really stress the fact that CAR needs longer-term solutions. We cannot continue really just doing firefighting. The time to think about long-term solutions is right. But for that to happen, we need more development funding to complement what the humanitarians have been doing for many years, which actually has an impact on the ground because, again, if we look at 10 years ago, probably it was 80% or even more than 80% of the people of CAR who were in need. This year, 2023, it's 56%. And we do hope that by combining the humanitarian response to more investments into development, we will see a decrease in the number of people getting in need of humanitarian response, because indeed that will have an impact on the load of humanitarian needs in the country. And therefore, that's a point that we are now continuing to stress and make that we need more development funding for CAR beyond just having to respond for humanitarian crisis. I will stop there and take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll open the floor for questions. First question goes to Edith Lederer.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. As Farhan said, my name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I have a couple of follow-up questions. I might have missed the number, but what is the humanitarian appeal for this year? And is there a separate appeal for all the refugees, especially the ones you've just gotten from Sudan? And secondly, could you tell us the impact of members from the Wagner Group who are in CAR? Are they having any impact on your operations? Do you see them? What are they doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. In terms of the funding for the humanitarian response plan, and that will include, the number I'm going to share will include in the addendum that we have done to respond to the Sudan crisis, which is $63 million US dollars. That will take us to a total for the humanitarian response plan of $534 million. So a little bit more than half a billion for 2023. And that's the amount I just said is only funded at 36%, so quite underfunded. But this is also the opportunity to share, and you may know this already, that the ERC has actually just released yesterday $6.5 million US dollars to support our humanitarian response plan in CAR. And that money really comes timely because it will help us indeed very quickly address some of the immediate needs of both the refugees that we have on the Sudan side, but also on the Chad side, but actually also address the needs of those 2.4 million people that were targeted into our human response plan. On your second question, we as humanitarians do our work in a seamless way throughout the country. We don't face any major challenge because of the presence of any party to the conflict. Of course, we do have sometimes access issues that are related to the armed groups who are actually quite active at the moment. But in most cases, we are able to negotiate our way through and be able to deliver the services that we deliver to the people. Thank you.
Thanks. Kristen?
I'm curious how much the amount requested in humanitarian assistance has gone up in the last couple of years. And if, so this year it's 534 million total. What was it last year and the year before? And are countries cutting back how much they're giving? Or is it just that their needs are so much greater, they're giving a similar amount and it's not having the same effect? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Compared to last year, the request in our HRP has actually gone up a little bit than it was in 2022 and also compared to 2021. But what we are witnessing is that the countries are actually giving less. As you probably may know, our major donor has always been the US. It still remains this year our major donor. But unfortunately, the US has cut quite significantly this year the funding that it has provided to CAR for a number of reasons. The main reasons being that they used to have windows for COVID, but also for Ukraine, which they also used to provide more funding to other countries. And that window was used by the US in 2021 and 2022. But they didn't have that window this year, and therefore that has decreased the amount of money that they can actually provide to us. Last year, they were providing more than 50% of the funding for the HRP. This year, they have provided about 1/4 so far. 1/4, yes.
Any other questions? I don't see any requests online, but then we'll go back to you.
You didn't mention at all the current military climate in the country, which obviously affects humanitarian operations, except you just said that the armed groups were somewhat more active. How long has that been going on? Is it getting worse? And how is that affecting your operations?
Thank you very much. Overall, the security situation in CAR has actually improved. We have seen quite significant improvements in terms of our capacity as humanitarians to access areas that, for example, we have not been able to access over the past 10 years. We see today residuals of security around the borders, like around the border with Sudan, with Chad, with South Sudan. But we do face a major challenge in the west part of the country because of explosive devices, because of mines. And that significantly really affects our capacity to move around. I must say that the presence of MINUSCA, which is quite widespread in the country, but also the fact that MINUSCA has a mandate to enable a humanitarian response, for example, by supporting escorts to our convoys and to humanitarians, has been very, very helpful and has been very positive in terms of our capacity to move around safely and to be able to deliver the services to the people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone have any other questions? If not, I will release our guest. Thanks very much. And we give our gratitude to Mohamed Ag Ayoya, the Deputy Special Representative for MINUSCA. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.